Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Got a bit of a different environment. We're no longer in the interrogation room. So today's video, I'm just going to break it all down for you. We've got Powell speaking very soon, and that will be at the open of the futures markets. But what I'm going to do is just break down what's been going on and what we can expect, because today is the first day where we start to get data on the jobs market. And the jobs market recently has been giving the Federal Reserve the idea that maybe they don't need to cut the interest rates. Yet the market is pricing in the idea of rate cuts. And we know what happens when the Fed pivots. The market usually tends to pull back. How much of a pullback? Who knows? But we were talking about it yesterday on our walking stream. Stocks are very overvalued, and I'm going to go into where we are with the stock market very shortly, so make sure you stick around for that. I'm also going to be diving into Bitcoin order flow so you guys have an understanding of where the orders are currently sitting. So if you are new, welcome to Traders Reality. Let's break it all down. So we get it all started off with the futures markets. Now, they are looking okay as we speak. I mean, if you saw that Nasdaq yesterday did try and take another all-time high. It's not yet claimed the 23,000, but investors are somewhat optimistic about trade negotiations. The deadline is getting very, very close, 9th of July, and the marketplace is effectively waiting for all these guys to come in and be like, we want to make deals with the US. The only ones I'm quite concerned about is the euro, because the euro, they're kind of difficult to work with, given that they have the biggest impact on the dollar itself. Going into the article, it does talk about that Trump and his tax bill is going to start getting investors a little bit concerned. And what you've got to understand about that one big, beautiful bill is it's going to add $3.5 trillion of debt onto the existing debt over the next 10 years. But they keep increasing the debt ceiling. So what's the point in the debt ceiling? And Elon Musk had said that. But they've already told us they were going to increase the debt ceiling when they had their first cabinet meeting with Trump, when Bessent had said that we've increased the debt ceiling so we don't have to worry about it for another 2 years. It's great on paper, but practically, is it going to serve? Because we've already got a problem with inflation. We've already got a problem with interest rates. So how is adding more debt going to sustain the US economy? Your dollar dominance is getting violated. Look at where the dollar is right now. As it stands, the dollar is losing its appreciation. Look, 95.9. That is horrible. Anything above 100, then you've got an appreciation. So if it was at 106, then you would have 6% purchasing power on your US dollar. With the dollar going down, you've got the euro actually marking up very, very well. You can see the euro is trading very well, positive, moving up to the upside. It's doing fantastic. And that's because investors are seeing that it's cheaper to go and obtain euros than it is dollars because the rates are so high. Now, let's just quickly go into the stock market to break it all down. As it stands, we know that the Nasdaq has got 1 distribution day and 5 on the S&P. Looking at the chart of the Nasdaq and the S&P, you can see here, bottom right, you can see that we've had ourselves our first accumulation day on the Nasdaq. Now, this is really good because we haven't had any accumulation days if you look at the volume on the right, but we've had 1 accumulation day coming into play. Now, today's going to be volatile. Kid you not. Look what's going on. Jerome Powell is speaking at the open of the futures markets, which is 2:30 p.m. UK time, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard. Now, we are light on volume this week because we, of course, have the 4th of July holiday coming into play. And the non-farm payrolls will be out on Thursday as opposed to the Friday. So realistically, investors have only 3 more days in principle to get into the exposure or remove exposure from the marketplace. Now, what can we expect from Powell today? Well, ladies and gentlemen, looking at assets across the board, I mean, if we just go into Bitcoin, you can see Bitcoin is looking kind of concerning right now. It is starting to pull back. But if we actually dive into what's going on with Powell, he's already had 2 board members saying that they want to cut the interest rates. That's starting to look like mutiny on the bounty because they have been consistent with their idea of keeping the interest rates high. But Powell is getting pressure from bloody hell, the government, the US. Trump is putting pressure on Powell to cut these rates because inflation is down and energy is down. But listen, if you're going to add to the deficit, naturally inflation is going to be a problem, and we are still waiting to see if tariff inflation is going to come into play. And that's exactly what Powell is saying to everyone, that we still haven't had the full impact of what inflation is really going to be like now that we're going to go into a deadline of trade talks and, of course, tariffs coming into action. Followed by that information, we've got the JOLTS job opening and the ISM manufacturing data. Now, that's going to tell us where we are on an economic perspective of the US economy. And if we do see that there is more jobs available in the JOLTS job openings, like I said, if you look at last month's reading, it was farcical. ADP came in lower, JOLTS job opening came in higher, and then non-farm payrolls came in as a surprise. So the data itself, in my opinion, is not really giving investors the scope of where to put exposure. What the data is doing is just creating short-term volatility, because the bigger picture is, at some point, they are going to cut the rates, because these levels are not sustainable given that the economy is starting to show signs of struggling, even though they're saying that it's not. Remember, tariffs have not come in just yet. Core durable goods orders came in last week, and that showed a wild reading of 16.8. That is double what they had expected, and that's only because businesses are trying to protect themselves and cover themselves for what it's going to look like when tariffs do come into play, because the cost of business is going to go up even more. Now, going into price action across the board, Bitcoin is starting to pull back ever so slightly. Yesterday's price action was absolutely divine. The Platinum members, and if you're not part of the Platinum group, which is the membership that we provide on the Traders Reality website, this is the setups that you'll be getting. Yesterday, we smashed it with the euro. We wanted to see euro make a move to the upside. They cleared our target. It was wonderful. On top of that, we had, of course, we had gold. That too also came into play. What I do is I project over 6 asset classes, okay? And yesterday was a good day for euro and for gold. We saw the reversal to the upside. We'll just quickly go and have a look at that. So there was euro's move up. We caught that big move higher. Happy days right there in the New York session. We had minimal drawdown on those, and then of course we had gold as well. That just continued to move up and absolutely ripped it apart with that entry point as well. Now, we didn't really get too much flavor on the Nasdaq because it just kept on going sideways, stayed within the entry point, but we didn't quite do too well on the Nasdaq. But that's because they are waiting for Powell to have a conversation today, which will bring volatility for the Nasdaq. But for me, I mean, Bitcoin, we didn't do too good on Bitcoin because it just started to trail lower and it didn't actually turn back. But the stars of the show had to be Solana and Ethereum. Ethereum came in wonderfully and cleared our target. We got over to Ethereum right here, and you can see that she just moved to the upside. So just get rid of that. Happy days. So yeah, that's where we were. We made the move to the upside. Awesome. And then she came straight back down. And then going over to Solana as well. Solana for me was the one. I was very conservative with Solana. I wanted to see it come back up and take the Asian session high, but she just ripped to the upside, of course, because of this Solana ETF story coming into play. Look at that. Straight move up. New York session. Wonderful. Took the Asian session high. And if some of the guys did hold on to it, they would have made bank. But if you didn't pay yourselves, you would have witnessed this madness coming into play and hoping that price was going to go back up in your favor just because price had made that move to the upside. Now, with that being said, going over into price action right now for Bitcoin, it is starting to pull back. But if we just consider the accumulation of the ETF, you can see $2.9 billion went into the ETF last week, and they are accumulating the Bitcoin ETF. And I've said it before, if there is a hedging process happening right now on the ETF, they are buying the ETF and they are shorting Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is, of course, a volatile asset. So if you're looking at the way Bitcoin's behaving right now on a short-term time frame, it's not really ideal. But if you are a short-term trader, then of course. But if you're looking at the daily time frame, you can see Bitcoin does have this imbalance down here on the green vector candle. Now, given that we have got Powell speaking and we've got a flurry of data coming out, there will be volatility coming into play with Bitcoin. It has still made lower highs right here. This is a bit of a problem for me. And in a bullish market, you're looking for Bitcoin to break out from that range and create higher highs. But we're not in that range just yet. So there's still maybe a little bit of time for Bitcoin to consolidate. Given that we do have a bit of a light week this week, ladies and gentlemen, Bitcoin is starting to pull into the previous week's zone, and what we really need to see Bitcoin doing throughout this week is staying above the previous week's open. The last couple of weeks open right here around the 105,659. As long as Bitcoin can stay above that point, then it would be consistent with accumulation, because you can see that the levels of price opening and closing are relatively equal inside of this range. So it tells us that there is interest inside of that zone for Bitcoin to be accumulated from. If we go into the actual order flow for the day, you can see that we've had quite a few bids coming into play, but equally you've got a lot of offers that are trying to come in to sell Bitcoin as it moves up. So make sure that you are monitoring Bitcoin as Powell speaks. What we're looking for Powell to say is, yes, we are going to cut the rates before September. Now, will it happen in July? I mean, I think the ideal scenario would be that we get a conviction that we are going to get the rate cuts in September. If they pull out any random figures and say we're going to cut in July, ladies and gentlemen, everything is going to fly. And then the moment we get the cut, that will be the pivot. That is when the idea of stocks being overvalued will come into play. And they're not just overvalued just by a stock bond ratio, they're overvalued by price earnings ratio as well. So that means they're going to need to pull back so that people can start picking it up on a discount. So if you made it this far, mad love and respect, ladies and gentlemen, hit the like button, subscribe. It's free to do. But more importantly, Powell talks at the open. So just don't overexpose yourself in terms of leverage and your capital whilst he's speaking. I know we all can be volatility junkies and what have you, but just make sure that you're keeping your risk low. Let him reveal to the marketplace where we are with the scope of interest rates. I believe we are going to get the rate cuts, but how much of a rate cut are we going to get? If Powell does give us any idea that he's still waiting on data, then we've only got until the 9th of July, which is the deadline for these tariffs and trade deals to come into play. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, please trade safely, and I'll tune into you all soon. Mad love and respect. Peace.